Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon. How's it going, everybody? Jesse Montaño, Guerilla Sports here, kicking off your week, talking some Avs, some NHL. We're going to get into which teams are contenders for this year. If you were on Twitter this weekend, you would see that there was maybe some controversy around Avs land this weekend as an article was put out. And look, keep in mind, these are um, articles of people that are like us, that are just online with their thoughts and feelings. But an article was put out this weekend that the Abs would not be cup contenders this season because of the uncertainty around the roster. So I figured that was maybe this was maybe a good opportunity for us to talk a little bit about who I think are going to be playoff or cup contenders this coming season. And how I'm seeing the league shaking out after a busy summer so far. We talked at the tail end of last week a little bit about how we saw the Central Division shaping up and how we saw some of the moves that were made by teams like Chicago and Nashville, how we see those maybe affecting the division as a whole. Do any of those moves move either of those teams into the top three? We also talked about a team like the Winnipeg Jets, who I feel like have taken a step back this summer in terms of they're trying to climb and be a solidified part of that top three. You know, they extend Connor Hellebuck last summer, Mark Scheifele last summer, and now they're kind of feels like they're back sliding the other way, back towards the wrong end of the division. So we talked about all that, but I wanted to take what I saw in the article over the weekend and combine it with what we saw, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, from the NHL. The NHL does their super, they call it the Super 16, the top 16 teams how they see them in the league. So I wanted to kind of push those two ideas together and run you guys through who I see as the top teams in the NHL going into next season. Both in terms of here's who I could see making the playoffs, and here's who I could see of those playoff teams kind of being the ones to be cup contenders. I think there's a lot of fun in the NHL right now. I think there's a lot of parity in the league. I think we have never seen a more competitive 1-32. It's amazing to me. I feel like you have teams, every year who make the playoffs when you weren't expecting them to, and you have teams that miss the playoffs and you weren't expecting them to, and usually they're teams that you're like, oh, well, I thought they'd make it, but I guess that's really no surprise. And I feel like more than ever that's true right now, where, I'm going to use the Seattle Kraken as the example of 2 years ago, they made the playoffs and really no one thought they would. And not only did they make the playoffs, they played extremely well, knocked off the defending Stanley Cup champion Colorado Avalanche, and then went 7 games around later. Only for them to miss by 17 points this past season. And again, somehow it's all been surprising, but none of it's been surprising. You know what I mean? There's just so much parity in the league. Again, the Vegas Golden Knights 2 seasons ago missed the playoffs, win the Stanley Cup a season ago, and then barely get in on in the last week this season. And it's all just kind of par for the course. So, as I was sitting here kind of putting together my list for who I thought was in, who I thought was maybe out, it's more. There are fewer and fewer slam dunk teams every year, in my opinion. And I feel like the net of who can win the Stanley Cup, I feel like that is constantly being cast wider and wider. Now, I think a lot back to what Nathan McKinnon talked about after the Avs did win the Stanley Cup when he said that the group had conversations throughout the years. They've gotten out of the first round. They've pushed something to a game 7. They've upset a team. And he said that, there would always be the conversation of like, we can do this. We can do this. And then he said after they won, it became pretty obvious. Like, nope, we couldn't do it. We thought we could do it, but we couldn't. The understanding of how much goes into it, I think is the part that when I say, we sit here and we talk about the fact that there are more teams than ever that could contend. I more of look at it as I see a wider group of teams that have the possibility to get to the chaos round of the playoffs. The round where you truly can say anything can happen, as evidenced by this year's Stanley Cup final. I think there's a lot of teams that can get there, but if you're truly asking me for the teams that I think are in a true contender status, can win it mode, I really think that it's just a few, honestly. And again, like I hate saying that because I know the NHL, it's about parity. It's about anything can happen. I think there's plenty of teams that, like I said, can get to that, what I refer to as the chaos stage of the playoffs. But that's a product of the parity. I think you have to be such a special team. I think you have to be built in a very special way to truly be in the mix from the start of the season as this is a team that could win. This is a team that has what it takes. We can see it on paper to get across the finish line. I think that's saved for a pretty select group of teams. I had a question on this week's mailbag, which you should go check out on YouTube, asking about the chemistry in the Avs room. And it mentioned the fact that Yakov Trenin had done an interview in the last couple of weeks saying that he felt maybe the locker room in Nashville was tighter, that there were some cliques in the Avs locker room. And someone was like, oh man, how concerning is this? I said, it's not concerning. It's not concerning because I actually think it's a great representation of what what the public knows about what it takes to win the Stanley Cup and how special those groups are and how special your group needs to be in order for you to get there. I think that happens once for a team and everybody kind of sits there saying, okay, well, that's not the standard. That's who they are. Every year now, they've got to go out and it's got to be perfect in the room. The culture's got to be exactly on point, and they've got to, this, that, and the other. And I just don't think that that's realistic. It's not going to happen that way. It's a unique group of guys every year. And it takes some gelling, and it takes, again, just the right group and the right set of leaders and the right people coming together at the right time to make things happen. And so that's why I think it's so hard to get across the finish line. It's so hard to do that multiple times. And it's so hard to do that from one year to the next. Even if you just did it, it's really hard to do that again. And then once you get away from it, it's hard to find it again. So, when I hear comments, Yakov Trenin saying, maybe it wasn't, perfect in Colorado this year. That's fine. That's expected, honestly. Um, it's just the way that things go in the salary cap world. Um, you're constantly making changes. You're constantly shifting. You're constantly rotating uh, players in and out. So um, you're not always going to have the same mix, and it's not always going to come out the way that you want it to, and it's not always going to gel the way you want it to. Um, but I think even with that, and again, I think the Avs are a great example of that. This past year is it cannot be perfect, and you can still pull something together, and you're going to put yourself in a situation to do something special. Now, obviously, if you have situations like what happened with the Avs and Val Nichushkin, that can derail things. But let's get into it a little bit. I want to run through quickly who the NHL had as their Super 16. Now, I should say I've got 16 teams. There's 8 East, 8 West, and I don't necessarily have them ranked. I I have the same number 1. I have number 1. But after that, I really do think that I think this is going to be an interesting year in the NHL. I think with the cap going up, it seems like there's been a change in the philosophy of the way that teams are constructing their groups. And I think there's also been, I'm calling it the Vegas effect of the fact that teams are looking at the salary cap now as something that can be solved. There can be a solution to the salary cap. If you get yourself in a bad situation, you can always find your way out of it. So, I think this is going to be an interesting season where it's going to be hard to predict. And I think I think this is going to be one of the more chaotic NHL seasons we've seen in a while. But NHL.com had the Florida Panthers at 1, the Edmonton Oilers at 2. Geez, the 2 Stanley Cup finalists. That's pretty easy. The New York Rangers at 3, Boston Bruins at 4, Dallas Stars at 5, Colorado Avalanche at 6, Nashville Predators at 7, Vancouver Canucks at 8, Toronto Maple Leafs at 9, Carolina Hurricanes at 10, New Jersey Devils at 11, Tampa Bay Lightning at 12, Winnipeg Jets at 13, Vegas Golden Knights at 14, LA Kings at 15, and the New York Islanders at 16. All right, I've got a couple different ways I can run through my list. You know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it by conference. Let me see if I can move stuff around here real fast and see if I can get this in order for you guys. But for the East, starting at 1, I think it's the Florida Panthers. You guys heard me talk about it all playoffs long. I don't think this, even with the Stanley Cup win that they are 1 month removed from, I do not think this Florida Panthers team has gotten anywhere near the respect they deserve. Back-to-back Stanley Cup final appearances, President's Trophy the year before. This has been a team that has been knocking on the door. They've been a threat multiple years in a row. They continue to build and build and build. They get over the hump, and that team does not look like it's going to be markedly worse next season. They found a way to bring Sam Reinhart back on an unbelievable deal, taking advantage of the no state tax, and are set up to not only be competitive in a repeat bid, but for years to come. A lot of it's going to depend on how Sergei Bobrovsky holds up and what they can do in net. You have Spencer Knight still there waiting in the wings after going through everything that he went through this year with the player assistance program. But Sergei Bobrovsky, $10 million deal as a goaltender that was being heavily scrutinized for years and years. You no longer care about it. It's immediately worth it. And he's kind of the linchpin to how successful they can be. The Florida Panthers are built to be an absolute force for the next few years. To me, they are the team to beat going into next season, not just because they're the defending Stanley Cup champions, but because they are that good. Behind the Florida Panthers, I got the Eastern Conference ones in order. I'm going to try to quickly, while I'm talking here, get my Western Conference in order as well. New York Rangers at number 2. I thought this is a team that for the last couple of years had not been pretending, but had maybe been overachieving. A team that had been riding the hot hand of Igor Shesterkin, potentially the league's best goaltender at the moment. For my money, it's still Andre Vasilevsky, but there is an argument to be made for Igor Shesterkin. Really riding the coattails of a dominant goaltender and a team that maybe didn't quite have the jam, didn't quite have the depth to get to where they needed to be. I still think there's a little bit of work to be done as far as that depth goes. And, they're the top half of their lineup, that scoring just dried up in the Eastern Conference Final, and they didn't have anything else to counter what Florida was pushing up ice. So I think they're getting better. I think incrementally each year they're improving. I think we've seen a massive step from Alexis Lafreniere, and he's going to be just an additional force up front. Of course, already Artemi Panarin, Mika Zibanejad. That's another team that I think is going to benefit from the fact that they have gone on some deep playoff runs as a young team. Keep in mind, this was just a few seasons ago that GM Chris Drury put out the statement saying this, be prepared for some pain. They referred to it as pain is ahead. And they were able to turn it around super quick with the help of Artemi Panarin. But I think they are the next best team behind the Florida Panthers going into next season. Following them, I've got the Carolina Hurricanes. Look, there's not much to say about the Hurricanes. They are one of the top teams every year. They're deep. Their defense is strong, and you have no idea what they're doing in net. It's a question mark every year in net. And then my other big complaint about the Carolina Hurricanes is who's the guy? Who's the guy for the Carolina Hurricanes? Who's the player that you're down by one or it's tied with 90 seconds to go in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Final, and you're saying, we're rolling this guy over the boards because we know he's going to go get it done? I've had NHL players tell me before that the Carolina Hurricanes' biggest problem is they are too depth heavy, if that makes any sense. They've essentially got a bunch of really good second lines. You had some first line players, you got some top end players sprinkled in there. But you don't have anybody truly elite, anybody that can dominate a game at the drop of a hat. It's been the Carolina Hurricanes' problem. It'll probably continue to be their problem. No Evgeny Kuznetsov next season. And then again, you just have such injury-riddled goaltenders making up your tandem. It's hard to feel overly confident with that in net. Number 4, I've got... I don't like it either, folks. I don't like it. I got the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, I'm not hard out on the Maple Leafs the way that I have been for the Edmonton Oilers in years past. But they're an interesting group because they're offensively deep. They have probably the best goal scorer currently. Alex Ovechkin is the greatest goal scorer of all time and will go down as that. But Austin Matthews currently in his prime, 69 goals this past season. Like, he's the best goal scorer in the league right now. As of right now, they still have Mitch Marner, who's an offensive threat. William Nylander, who I think is the most underrated player on that roster and arguably one of their most consistent. John Tavares, who's John Tavares? You know, he's good. He's John Tavares. He's kind of there. It's hard to rank a team as talented and as skilled and who finishes as consistently high in the standings as the Toronto Maple Leafs do. Even though when you look at that roster, it's obvious to see the flaws. And I think this is a team who has been the victim of its fan base. I think Toronto Maple Leafs are not all that unlike Colorado's own Denver Broncos, who are going on a decade of misery and losing because they are victims to the pressure of the fan base. Compete right now. Go out and get players that are good right now. We don't have time to sit around and wait for development. I once heard someone say something on the radio here in Denver who said, there's people talking about the Broncos needing to do a rebuild. Well, a rebuild isn't acceptable in Denver. And I remember sitting there thinking, I heard that and I said, oh, they're going to be bad for a long time. They're going to be bad for a long time if the mindset and the attitude is we won't accept a rebuild. We only accept playoff and championship caliber. Because you know what, guys? There's no shortcut to that. There's no shortcut to being a championship caliber team. The Edmonton Oilers have learned that lesson. The Toronto Maple Leafs have learned that lesson hard every year. You cannot simply outskill your way to a Stanley Cup. Can't be done. Even the Edmonton Oilers, again, it looked like they were going to do it. It looked like they had the juice to come back, overcome the 3-0 deficit. But suddenly when Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid were held off the score sheet, dried up, went away. They couldn't hang. So it's hard for me in the same way that when we get to the West, you're going to see it's hard for me to rank teams like Edmonton and Toronto much lower because they're constantly winning regular season games and finishing up in the standings. What they do in the playoffs is a different story. I got the Maple Leafs at 4. At number 5, some of you may not like this. I've got Tampa. I've got Tampa at number 5. This is just, they're slowly, folks. They're slowly being pushed. They're being pushed out. But I'm anxious to see what they do. I'm anxious to see what they do this year. They're clearly going with a change. They're moving on from Steven Stamkos. They moved on from Mikhail Sergachev. You still have Andrei Vasilevsky in net. You add Jake Gensel. You've still got Nikita Kucherov. You've still got Braden Point. You've still got Victor Hedman. They're retooling on the fly here to see what magic they can find. And that's just a group that again, the exact opposite of Toronto and Edmonton. I just struggle to bet against them, but they're working their way down. At number 6, I've got Boston. This is again another team that going into last year, I just did not believe in. And they just keep proving me wrong. So what do I know? What do I know? This is a team that I keep saying, nope, they're down and out. They've lost too much. They've had to move on too much. They've had to change, the makeup of their groups here and there. And they just keep ending up at the top of the standings. So while I have them moving down, I still think they're a playoff team. Pretty solidly. Now, these last 2, I think there is a changing of the guard. I think we have a changing of the guard with these last 2. I really struggled to not put Washington in. I think they've made some moves this summer that have helped. I think they've gotten better. And I think you're going to see a more determined than ever Alexander Ovechkin. We're on record watch, guys. We are on record watch. A big year from Ovechkin. And we could see one of the all-time great records in professional sports fall. And really, it doesn't even need to be like an exceptional year from Ovechkin. It needs to be a slightly above average Ovechkin year. He can't have the slow start that he did last year. If he's, let's say by Christmas at like 15, like look out. I believe he's 43 away. That is well within the range of what he can do in a single season. So I think he's going to be really motivated. But I left Washington outside of my 8. To me, they're 9. At number 7, I'm buying, folks. I am buying Buffalo Sabres. Buffalo Sabres. I think this is the year. I think this is the year for the long-suffering fans of upstate New York. I think Buffalo has been building and building and building and building. I think you finally got a couple good answers in net. Not great answers. Not top of the league, not NHL All-Stars. I really like Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. I think you bring in James Reimer to be a little bit more steadying. I think Bowen Byram is going to help that team take another huge step. You've suddenly built a really solid defensive core. Bowen Byram, Owen Power, and Rasmus Dahlin. I think they add, I really like the add of Jason Zucker. Tage Thompson, I'm a big fan of. Peyton Krebs, big fan. You're adding Nicholas Abe-Kubel, Stanley Cup champion with the Colorado Avalanche. Going to bring a little bit of grit and some more championship experience to that locker room. You got yourself out from underneath the contract of Jeff Skinner. I think this is a fun group that I think could have some of that rallying mentality. This could end up being my worst prediction of the summer, by the way. The Buffalo Sabres could very easily finish like last in the Eastern Conference, but I think they do it. I think they push through. I think they squeak into the playoffs. And number 8, rounding out my Eastern Conference, I do have the Philadelphia Flyers, Eric Johnson and the boys from Philly, John Tortorella. Look, I think this was a team that was pushing last year. They were right there at the cusp, right up to the end of the season, and the wheels kind of fell off. You're adding Matvei Michkov. This was a prospect that was being billed as, if it wasn't for the contract status in the KHL and the uncertainty of when he was going to come over, there were several scouts that were saying, this is a player that's on par with, I almost said Connor McDavid, Connor Bedard. That he is not as far off of Connor Bedard as you would think. As many in, many of the scouts and much of the reporting would have you think. So I think that's going to make a significant difference. In going back to what we were talking about with Carolina, who's the guy? Philadelphia may have just found their guy. And this is who we're going to roll over the boards with 2 minutes to go. Got that scoring touch. I love the bringing Eric Johnson back for that veteran leadership. I think they're going to have an interesting group. So there's my East: Florida, Rangers, Carolina, Toronto, Tampa, Boston, Buffalo, then Philly. Let's head on over to the West. They got it done. Got it done, folks. Got this moved around for you. So I am going to start at the top. It's Edmonton. Like I said, how do I not have them there? For everything that I talked about with them this past season, I didn't believe in them, especially the way they got started. And I didn't believe in them not because of this season, but because of everything that's happened in seasons prior. They go to the Stanley Cup Finals. They overcome a 3-0 deficit. I really liked the additions of Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson. What did I say a minute ago? The depth dried up. Or not the depth, the scoring dried up in the Stanley Cup Final. They needed someone else to be a threat out there. While I was just praising Buffalo for getting out from underneath the Jeff Skinner contract, what Edmonton is paying Jeff Skinner is not the same as what Buffalo is paying Jeff Skinner. I like that addition, and then I really like the Victor Arvidsson one. He has been a thorn in the Central Division side ever since he, was with the Nashville Predators. I think he's a really good, really underrated player, smaller guy, but plays bigger than he is. I really like that ad. I think those are two players that are going to give them some additional punch. I still don't know what they're doing in net, and I still don't think they have a D-core that can truly compete with Stanley Cup contenders, but I've got them at the top. of the Western Conference for right now. Kind of feels obligatory. At number 2, this one maybe feels a little homerish and a little unfair, but I've got Colorado, and I have Colorado there not because I think the way that the roster sits right now is so outstanding, but I have them right there because I think being able to keep Jonathan Drouin saves your top 6. You've got the reigning MVP and Ted Lindsay Award winner, and I'm also trying to account for the fact that there's a very real scenario that is both Val Nichushkin and Gabe Landeskog making their way back into the lineup at some point this season. If you add that, I think this is the best roster in the NHL. If you add Val Nichushkin and Gabe Landeskog back to this group, I think it's the best roster in the NHL. The Avs are accounting for that salary cap wise, that's a real possibility. And so as a result, the roster may suffer a little bit while you wait to see what happens with those two. So I'm making that prediction based on what I know is possible. And if that happens, not only will this Avs team be a playoff contender, not only will they be Stanley Cup contenders, for my money, they will be the best roster in the NHL and the likely Cup favorites. You are talking about 2 in-season adds that are bigger than what any other team could possibly think to add through trade or prospects or whatever. That's how I'm looking at this. From there, I'm going with Vegas, actually. Again, this is a team that barely snuck into the playoffs this last year, had some weird inconsistencies with what was happening throughout the season, but I really liked their trade deadline ads. You bring in Noah Hannafin, you bring in Tomas Hertl. Yes, you lose Jonathan Marchessault. That's going to hurt. But they're making steps in net, and I was told at the draft that they are already accounting for the fact that they don't think Mark Stone is going to play in the regular season this year. So that tells me they're probably going to go out and add still. And that this is probably going to be a pretty formidable team. Again, Vegas, I don't ever really know what to account for. They're a little all over the place, but you got Tomas Hertl, who's healthy. You got Jack Eichel. You got William Karlsson. You got Alex Pietrangelo. There's still a lot of really good players on this team, and I think they are one of your, if you're just going based on paper, they're probably one of your safer bets. Coming up behind them, I do have the Dallas Stars, Western Conference finalists this year, knocking off the Colorado Avalanche in the second round. Dallas, I think they're in a funny spot because you've got guys like Wyatt Johnston and Jason Robertson. And I think you've got a lot of Logan Stankoven as well. I think you've got a lot of really exciting and intriguing young players in Dallas. And what I think was propping a lot of that up this year was the fact that you also had players like Jamie Benn having great years, players like Matt Duchene having great years, players like Tyler Seguin having resurgent years, and players like Joe Pavelski humming along doing what they do. You also had a guy like Chris Tanev anchoring your back end to go along with Miro Heiskanen, who I think is one of the very, very few defensemen who are in the same category as a guy like Cale Makar. However, Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin, Matt Duchene, they're all a year older now. And it's a long season. Are you going to be able to get that type of play out of them again? You've also got Joe Pavelski, no longer with the team. You still got Rupe Hintz, who's going to be there and continue to do what he does. But I just think that we're going to have to wait and see what this Dallas Stars team is. I am not ready to pencil them into, elite Stanley Cup contender status quite yet. Coming in after them, we got the Nashville Predators. We talked about them at the end of last week. Of course, you like the addition of Steven Stamkos. Of course, you like the addition of Jonathan Marchessault. You've got Roman Josi there on the back end. You got UC Saros and net, Vladislav Askarov coming up behind him. Ryan O'Reilly down the middle. You like a lot of what they've got there, but again, it's just starting to feel a little bit like the Dallas Stars of old, the NHL's best over 35 team. We'll see. Building your team through free agency historically is 100% not how you do things. But all their best players, maybe with the exception of Roman Josi, are all their best skaters, I should say, are free agent acquisitions from within the last 12 months. So we'll see. Coming in after them, I've got the Vancouver Canucks. I thought they took a decent step this year, a little bit overachieved. Were able to push the Edmonton Oilers to the brink, but ultimately came up short. I think this is a team that's building. They lose Nikita Zadorov this year off the back end, which is definitely going to hurt. But I think that's a team that's continuing to build. You're going to get a healthy Thatcher Demko back. And I like this team's chances to be right there in the mix. Again, I'm not penciling them in as a Stanley Cup contender, but I think they're going to be right there in the mix. My last two teams bringing it up here, similar to Buffalo. This is the year, and I'm sorry, Arizona. It's the year for Utah. Utah, I think, gets in this year. I think they take another step. I think Logan Cooley, Clayton Keller, with the addition of Mikhail Sergachev on the back end, I think this is a team that can take a step. I would like to see them maybe figure out what the F they're doing in net. But on the whole, I think Utah finally takes a step. And then bringing up the rear, eighth team in the Western Conference that I got is the Winnipeg Jets. Seeing this group up closest last year in the playoffs, you saw that they just didn't quite have it. The group just really was a lot of good players, nobody that was really special to kind of take over. And then again, they've had a couple moves this summer that I think have moved them a little bit in the wrong direction. So I think they're good enough to hang around. You got Connor Hellebuck. He's always going to keep you in it. But I think if they get in this year, it's going to be because they can narrowly hold off a Minnesota, a Seattle, an LA, maybe. I don't even think Chicago is going to be in that range. Maybe like a St. Louis, but I think they'll be able to hold off those teams and get into that last spot. But there it is. That's how I've got the West shaking out. Edmonton, Colorado, Vegas, Dallas, Nashville, Vancouver, Utah, Winnipeg. I know obviously the way that it goes is a little bit different because wild card and top of the division and all that stuff. But those are my 8 best teams from each conference. Give me what I think are the 16 best teams in the NHL this year. And of those, I really do. I think your true contenders are going to be Florida, New York, the Rangers, and then I'd say Colorado and Edmonton. And everyone else, I think you're good enough to get there, and then let's see what happens. Colorado comes with the asterisk of, I am treating this as if they will get both Gabe and Val back at some point this year. Because look, whether you like it, don't like it, think I'm crazy, think I'm really smart, that is a real possibility. And you have to account for that if you're the Avalanche. You have to be ready for the fact that you may get $15 million worth of players back in season. So if that happens, they are absolutely the team to beat, but we got to wait to see if that happens. So that should, I think that should do it. There's my Super 16 to start the season for the NHL this year. I won't be back tomorrow. Should be JJ. We're going to try to get someone else in here with him to cover that, but we'll be back. I will be back at the end of the week on Friday talking all things Avs. And guys, we got a really exciting meeting going on here at Guerilla Sports today. Everything about the coverage just continuing to get bigger and better and all of that. So keep an eye out for that in the coming weeks. Really looking forward to getting to show you guys everything. Got Jay back there running the board as always today, making sure that everything sounds and looks great as it always does. For Jay, I'm Jesse Montaño. Thanks for hanging out, guys. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good one.